Hi, Vasanti.
I was waiting for you, Father. Vasanti, welcome. You are on
Thank
mute, I think.
you.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Waiting so eagerly to see you, to listen to you.
Thank you, Father. Thank you. It's been one of my relatively tougher presentations. After I committed on the topic, I realized that it took much longer than what I thought.
Right.
It's a lovely heading to, I mean, it's pregnant with possibilities of so much of discussion. And I know, knowing you, you've done a fantastic, thought into it.
I just hope so.
Yes. We'll just take a minute more and then start. It's 3:59.
Yeah. Should I just test the
Yes.
slide?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes, but it's partly getting cut. Shayan, is that because of the view mode?
It's clear for us, yeah.
It's clear. Okay, fair enough. Then it's something to do with me.
Great.
Right. Yes. Today is clashing with a program that the students are engaged in. So that's a little bit of a dampener for us. Okay, so it is 4 o'clock. I'm going to start. So very, very warm welcome to all of you here. This is the 11th talk in the series of the Pathmaker CGEIL Dialogues. CGEIL, the Center for Gender Equality and Inclusive Leadership, set up to, see what can be done to arrest the falling labor force participation for women, as well as to improve the gender equality index that kind of India has. We work three main, pillars that we work on. One is knowledge and advocacy. The other is research, and the third is programs. The Pathmaker series have attracted a wide variety: thinkers, practitioners, professionals, people with interest around this topic. And today we are extremely delighted to have Vasanti with us on a very interesting subject and a topic. But to do the honors, I'm going to request Dr. Rajiv Roy, Dean, XLRI NCR, alumnus of Ahmedabad, himself an entrepreneur, startup mentor, evangelist, as well as somebody whose book Entrepreneurship is a must kind of a read. Rajiv, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce our very special speaker today, Vasanti Srinivasan.
Thank you, Pritha. And Professor Vasanti Srinivasan, it's a pleasure to introduce you over here. You have been of course, alumni of XLRI, but much more than that, you have been a very able supporter of ours and various of our causes all through time. It gives me great pleasure to invite Professor Vasanti Srinivasan. She's currently professor in the OB and HR area in IIM Bangalore. She was a member of the Uday Kota Committee on Corporate Governance, which was set up by India's SEBI in 2017. She's a member of the Business and Human Rights Working Group, which is constituted by India's National Human Rights Commission. She's also on the drafting committees of the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct and the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. She was on a subcommittee, a part of the Second Administrative Reform Commission of Karnataka. Her current research projects include assessment and reporting on business and human rights reporting by Corporate India, which is in association with the National Human Rights Commission, and building the Gender Diversity Index for Corporate India, which is with support from the National Foundation of Corporate Governance. She has been a great supporter of XLRI in general and also of XLRI at Delhi-NCR. In fact, she was part of one of our very early programs when she came in. I think she was the first outside faculty, so as to say, was involved in any of our NDPs. So she was always been more than happy to support us. So good to have you back over here, Professor Vasanthi, and over to you. Please go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rajiv, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Father, for having me here, and Preeta, my friend. What I'm going to do today is a little bit of a reflective piece on my journey over 2 decades. And as I was kind of putting together this presentation, I just realized that I had taken on a task that was just too big and would possibly not, I'm not sure how ably I would do justice to it in 30 minutes that I have. But for me, it was a good exercise, because sometimes when you're working in a field for such a long time, what moves, it's almost like the needle. You can't see the movement, but things have moved. Would I have imagined that there would be a Center for Gender Equality like this, and we would be having a session with close to 50 participants here on a Friday afternoon? And would we be talking about what does it mean to enhance gender diversity? Would I look at the kind of Women's Day celebrations across companies, across countries? When you begin to kind of reflect on seeing women in public spaces, while we continuously want more of it, but it's also important to take stock of the fact that when we are talking about gender diversity and moving the needle, we are actually talking about social change. And I want us to constantly remember this, because social change has never happened in one generation. And therefore, it is important for us to see that every step that we take is a step towards a societal transformation. And therefore, wherever we are, whoever we are, that step is so crucial to move the agenda. It's against this backdrop that I want to locate today's presentation. And as I kind of bring in my perspectives, I started off in 2004 asking this question, where are the women managers? Primarily because I couldn't see them in the executive education programs that IIB was hosting. A friend of mine from Rutgers came over and said, Vasanthi, do you want to do a workshop on women managers? And in 2006, I was scampering all over the place in Bangalore to identify 24 women managers who will turn up at the workshop. And finally, we had 12. And from there, I began to ask what is happening. And subsequently, I went down the path of research. Spent years looking at career identities, work-life balance of women professionals. Why is it that we are not able to see women in critical roles? And then in 2011, as the Companies Act was coming up and discussions were happening, we did a study on looking at building the pipeline for women directors in India. And in 2013, when the legislation came through, the question really in our heads was, well, we have the directors, most of them are independent directors, but where are the executive directors? And then one of my senior friends in the industry called out and he said, you academics talk a lot, you write a lot, but you don't do anything. And that kind of triggered on saying, what could one do? And his question was, where are these women that you keep talking about? And so in 2016, in partnership with IBM and Catalyst at that point in time, we decided that we will start a segregated women-only development program called Tanmatra. As I speak to you, Tanmatra is in its 8th edition. We have close to 200 alumni. And today, when corporate India asks me saying, where are the women? I have 12 women for any speaker, any forum, any committee. So today, last year, we had 97 applications for 30 seats on the program. Okay. So the where are the women question, I don't think we should talk about anymore. And now I kind of have come back to actually looking at how can we shift women in manufacturing. Along with this, I realized that if 50% of the world's population's gender diversity agenda is going to take me 20 years, who out there is actually going to call out on persons with disability, on LGBTQ? So the more recent work in the last 3 years, all my work has been research, and it's like coming back the whole cycle to 2004. Yeah. So there is a little bit of poignancy, there is a little bit of celebration, but above all, there is this recognition that our plurality in the context has just become intense. The external pressure for gender diversity is increasing. We need to show short-term results. We don't have choices. And yet social change is about deliberate long-term changes. How then do we as a nation, as a corporation, as a society, and as institutions navigate the short-term and long-term of what it means when we are looking at gender diversity? It's a long canvas, a wide canvas that I painted to kind of start this session, but it's going to be so important because I have a deck of slides where some I will pass very quickly. I see some of you in this group who are researchers. I hope you will pick some of those strains so that you can take it forward as you kind of need to explore on where are we. What I definitely do not want to offer is one-size-fits-all solutions, because we don't have them today. So let's begin with this famous quote by William Gibson, who actually coined the word cyberspace, who said, "The future is already here. It's just not visible and evenly distributed for all." And this is the one that we need to kind of think about. My focus in this presentation, like I mentioned, is about women. One of the things I'm beginning to realize is that you cannot see women. We'll have to look at poor women, rural women, caste, poor women, persons with disability, rural women, scheduled tribe, urban women. So the intersectionality today needs great attention, because in this intersectionality lies vulnerability. And this is an important issue for policymakers, just as much as it is important for all of us who are researchers, as much as it is important for practitioners, because when you talk about socio-economic as a criteria for your CSR, what does it mean to be a rural persons with disability woman is a completely different phenomena from an urban person with disability woman. One of the things, and I'm just going to leave this again as a reflection piece, is that what I see around me in 20 years is that paradoxes and dilemmas related to gender diversity have just increased. And what I'm going to lay here are those paradoxes that I see. What is a paradox? And let's just get a common perspective. Paradox is something that's contradictory, seemingly contradictory. And therefore, there is this belief that it is irreconcilable. What's a dilemma? The difference between a paradox and a dilemma is situational. It's a situation in which a difficult choice has been to be made between two or more alternatives, both of which have something undesirable about them. Tensions occur while engaging with both paradoxes and dilemmas. So this is the basis for today's presentation. So by its very nature, today's presentation is raising questions. I do have some ideas at the end, but they are more to close, because paradoxical thinking is not about problem solving. It's about ensuring that impacts, particularly negative impacts, are minimized. So let's look at this. What a paradox. What a paradox. 50% of the world's population are women, and in no sphere are they represented at 50%. Yeah, except school teachers and nurses. Even more interesting, after India and China, we are the 3rd billion. Do we get the same attention as India and China? No way. The paradox of an inability to make the distinction between sex and gender. Sex is biological, male, female, and the other. Gender is a product of socio-psychological processes influenced by the external environment in terms of how you're brought up, how are you socialized, your family context, the school environment, the larger societal values, beliefs, and their conditioning of your behaviors. So what happens? Sex is male, female, and the other. and for now I'll focus on male and female. Gender is masculine and feminine. Typically masculine defined as aggression, acquisition, dominance. Feminine often associated with qualities of care, nurture. And therefore what happens is we place the male with the masculine and we place the women with the feminine and do justice to two sets, do injustice to two sets of people. The feminine man and the masculine women. And I think this is important to recognize because organizational behaviors, when we come to it, you think of the organization man. So organization behaviors by their very nature over the years have become masculine. And therefore, these behaviors that are asked of means that both the feminine man and the feminine woman suffer. Does it enable positively for masculine women? No, not really. And we will come to that in a little while. This is something that can be looked at from several ways. But at this point, I want to look at this data of just calling out on saying, economists for long have fought on this, of saying that if only household work in India could be monetized, then it will be equivalent to salaries of high-paying jobs in the country. And imagine if the government had to pay for care jobs, we would be bankrupt. Okay. So I just want to leave this point with each one of us because when we look at homemakers, housewives, call them by anything, but the fact is that the amount of household work that they carry is what sets up several others in the family, home, and society and community to succeed. And yet, that is unpaid work, almost always considered as never considered in any of the economic conversation. I want to also leave another one. This time when we were watching the Republic Day parade, we saw these incredible women officers of India showcasing their capability. The very next day, I was at campus, and there is the housekeeping lady who walked up to me and asked me whether I saw the Republic Day parade. I said, yes, I did. And she said, were you not impressed? I said, what impressed you? She said, if only I had known that I could have got into the armed forces, I would have loved to be there. Very important because for the first time, average common women begin to believe that being a woman does not mean that we have differentiated skills of care. So every bastion that women are breaking today is a signaling to several million women out there that you have the skills to aspire to go to any job. Why is this important? Because there is no evidence whatsoever to support that women indeed have fully differentiated skills. And I want to kind of call out this because if indeed they have differentiated skills, and for those of you who have read this book on the gendered brain, you will realize that women's brains came much later into the medical schools to get investigated. It's as late as 1984 that health issues related to women and the need to study women's health as separate from health of men, the whole idea, the right to study came in so late. So the point I want to leave you with is that do we really have differentiated skills? Evidence is not supporting. So if then that is the case, then isn't it a function of nurture rather than nature? And last but not the least, this one has just kept me going for all these years because we know that women's careers are ebbs and tides in the flow of time. There will be very few women who have never gone slow in their careers, who've never taken a break in their careers. And yet, do we know how to bring back women? Do we know how to actually put them in their growth path after they take a break and come back? Corporate India today, and I'm sure many of you who are here are struggling with this issue, particularly in the context of maternity. Let's now look at dilemmas. Is gender diversity a new fad? Or, Professor, it's one of those things that keeps happening. Professor, next will be LGBTQ persons with disability. I've heard this over and over. Sometimes mindful CEOs ask me if this is a historical correction that I need to do as a sustainable organization. Slavery once upon a time was accepted. Opium was legal. So it's interesting that as society changes, we may have to ask some difficult questions. I love this question. Professor, don't you think we are compromising on meritocracy when we provide opportunity and access to women? Are we not compromising on meritocracy? For those of you who are interested and who have read Michael Sandel, I think this argument is quite interesting. But the underlying assumption is that meritocracy and men go hand in hand. This is another interesting one. Often people ask me saying, how do I build assertiveness in my women managers? And then I'm often asked saying, how did you build assertiveness in your male leaders? Should we fix the women or should we fix the system? Is the way we look at our policies and criteria for evaluation the problem? Or is it the women who are the problem? If it's one woman, I can understand. If it's two women, I can still understand. But if you tell me that you have to fix all your women, then clearly it is about the structure. Even more interesting. Oh, Professor, discrimination. No, we don't discriminate. Of course you don't discriminate because we don't recognize discrimination. Discrimination is in the eyes of the excluded, not in the eyes of the included. So it's interesting. Do we call out unconscious biases and discrimination? Or do you just do more and more of sensitization and awareness? Why? Because one is negative and the other is positive. You can do 500 training programs, but if you have to track the cases of discrimination, that's tough, right? You need to create a culture. Let's go on to look at some of the dilemmas that women experience. First, what's my identity? And I'm just going to share a piece of work that I did on looking at women's identities. Over the several decades, I think what we've been able to do very well in India is acquire an educational identity for women, and which is what you're seeing in terms of higher increased enrollments in secondary and tertiary education. But has this identity translated in terms of a job identity, an employment identity, and then, of course, the career identity? If women have to stay and grow in the workforce, what we need is career identity. The belief that I need to invest, stay, and grow. What comes in the way of the professional identity? My caregiving identity. Just yesterday, there was this wonderful conversation where someone was telling me that she's planning to take off for 3 weeks when her daughter has a board exam. So in some way, board exam is one event to demonstrate my maternal identity. Do I need to do that at all? And this tension between the caregiver identity and professional identity means several women leave the workforce. The second one, and I don't even have to talk about it, time and priority guilt versus self-development and investment. A few years ago, I did a study on comparing the developmental investments that women make on themselves and men make on themselves. Amazing. Financially, men make more investments on themselves through certifications, through investing through executive programs. women make far lesser investments. Even more interesting, women learn through networks. They learn through forums that allow for presentation and engagement. Men learn by themselves. So when organizations put up these courses, and I was looking at the differences in terms of men and women in the self-paced learning courses, and very interesting, completion rates for women were much, much lower than that for men. How do we use such data to be able to look at how do we make self-development and investments on women long after they come into work? How do we do this? Needless to say that if we went back, we know that educational decisions in household level are about whether it is a boy or a girl. There is evidence that family prioritizes in investing for the male child. Yeah, and that again is deeply culturally rooted. Women's dilemmas, they keep asking me, saying, should I speak up and be called aggressive? Or should I keep quiet and reinforce the stereotype of being submissive? If you do the first one, what are the consequences? If you do the second one, what are the consequences? And the double bind is that neither of them get you promotion. Forget about the gender pay gap, which is just, we are not even talking about it in this presentation. Over and over when I talk to senior women leaders, since they're, I want to provide another insight that we gained, which is very few women in their lives have been asked, what do you hope to be? When they were young children or in school, we're rarely asked, what do you hope to be when you grow up? Why is this important, this question? For the simple reason that career exploration research says that children engage in fantasy careers. When you ask a male child, typically the responses, and it's very, very often that male children ask, what will you be? And they will talk about being an engine driver, a train driver, a bus conductor. What are they doing? They are engaging with fantasy careers. Okay? Women don't even have, girl children don't even have the opportunity to engage with fantasy careers with adults, asking them why do they want to be a bus conductor or an astronaut or whatever it may be. So if you have never been asked that question, you have an aspiration deficit. So many women, when they come into work, see strong role models at the workplace and aspire to become them, like them. 24 years of conditioning and rewiring is needed to be able to move that aspiration deficit. And therefore, I hear a lot of women being grateful for how far they have come. I think gratitude is magnificent. But gratitude in the absence of understanding one's potential and ability to grow is sad. And what we see is this dilemma. This is one of the more recent ones that we are encountering. There's a deep gendered perception both among women and men that men should get job preferences, and it's quite significant and strong. So which means that women feel guilty when they get promoted. So the point I want to leave with you, and I'm going to kind of quickly focus, please remember that the reason I placed all those tensions and dilemmas is that any which way, whether you're a policymaker, whether you're a manager, or whether you're an academic, when we are studying a phenomena, the complexity of the variables that we are looking at becomes so important when we make assessments. I'm now going to focus in the next 3 slides on looking at tensions in corporate India, which is where a large part of my research has been. Corporate India still struggling. Is gender diversity a business case or an ethical imperative? And unfortunately, I have no evidence to offer them other than the McKinsey study, which I quote. Simply for the simple reason that there's as much academic evidence which proves that high-performing businesses tend to actually hire better women and more women. Does women having more women impact performance, or do high-performing organizations tend to have more women? As many studies which show one-sided relationships, two-sided relationships. So basically, we don't know, and I cannot provide you a compelling business case unless you tell me. Is it an ethical imperative? Absolutely. There's no doubt at all, and which is the argument that I have been framing so far. That it is a historical correction, and that 50% of the workforce not represented, 50% of the world's population not represented anywhere near, is that acceptable? And that's a question that one has to ask. How should we do this? Should we do it through quotas or goodness of heart of leaders? I think the answer for me today is somewhere in between. Looking at what's happened with women on boards, I'm inclined to believe that there is a place for quotas and there is a place for goodness of heart. Now, you see, I'm quickly coming into saying, how do we resolve paradoxes? Should it be linked to incentives for senior leadership, or should it be done through nudge? Both. Should it be a percentage across the organization or at different levels? Both. Should we develop plaque policies, or should we manage exceptions? Both. Should we fix the structure, or should we work on culture? Both. And you now begin to see that the days of or are gone. If I was doing this session 10 years ago, I would have had specific answers. But today, we are gone long past the stage of or. It is an and. Look at this. Are women acquiring higher education more than ever before? Yes. Has regulation of women on boards brought in more women independence? Yes. Are women resumes stronger than those of their male counterparts in most contexts? Yes. Do biases, self and organizational, prevent women from growing within the organization? Yes. Look at the return to work and how much organizations are struggling. This is the piece that I want to talk about. Does the marriage market reward for educated women? Does the marriage market reward better than the labor market? Today, this is a big yes. Both class mobility, caste mobility, all of this, and socioeconomic mobility for educated women, marriage market rewards are more than labor market. So I think it's important to, at this time, just step back and ask, what we have today, as we look at the external context and Indian challenges for India, what we have here today is a complex maze. All of this happening in simultaneity. And therefore, for any of us who has to make a decision, prioritizing is the key challenge. I like to think of this. Ritchell and Weber called some of these as wicked problems. Why? Because any solution that you provide will have intended and unintended consequences. And the unintended consequences need to be managed, because those unintended consequences could actually jeopardize the intended consequences. And so when we are grappling with a wicked problem, what is the mindset that we need to be able to look at it? Earlier, Rajiv, when he was making an introduction, in my introduction, was talking about my policy work. One of the things that I realized as I began the analysis on gender disclosures in the business responsibility and sustainability reporting is that while the top 500 companies are all talking about making progress on gender diversity, what about the supply chains? These supply chains go farther and farther into India. They are all privately held companies. So if corporate India says that they are highly gender diverse, the next question would be that, is that sufficient? What's happening in your supply chains? And right now we have no data. When you look at corporate India, women employment in contract in many places as contractual labor in housekeeping is very high. In several industries, low wage, long hours work are more or less done by women. We've historically known about agriculture, but almost all of the low cost industries, the labor is highly, so what we call is the feminization of workforce. Wage gap is pretty high, even in a feminized workforce context. The point I want to just leave is that we are now at a stage where this problem is multidimensional and requires multi-stakeholder intervention. So let me just close with what are my thoughts at this point in time. And I hope that in the audience today, we have enough people from the stakeholder community that I'm going to talk about. Do we need a national action plan for vulnerable groups, particularly intersectionality of women, since the government has identified women as a group to be addressed? What kind of representation metrics do we need, and how do we actually track this? How do we de-gender institutions? Women don't want to go to the police station to complain. We don't know how courts will treat women coming up with cases. Banks ask for so many collaterals for women. So if the institutions are gendered, empowering women in itself is not going to solve the problem. Clearly, we need stringent implementation of laws pertaining to all of it, whether it is posh, whether it is, it's just one can go on. Accessible and affordable education for the girl child. I think some states have done a magnificent job, which other states could potentially look at. And last but not the least, all of us here would know and would have some time or the other spoken about safe spaces. Safety is a right for a citizen. Are women safe? Organizational level, I'm just going to, much I can speak about each one of this. The one that I'm actually going to be focusing on is policies and frameworks for inclusion. And I'm particularly going to call out a small piece of work that we did. We realized that this organization has been hiring women for several years, maybe close to 25, 30 years in India. But why is it that they had no women at the top? Simple. The promotion policy said that you need to have outstanding ratings consecutively for 3 years. And believe you me, between the age of 25 to 35, there will be very few women who would have consecutive 3 years of outstanding ratings, for the simple reason that I'm not going to prioritize a performance appraisal rating over having a child. So are our policies gendered? All that the organization did was said that you need to have 3 years of outstanding performance over a 5-year period, and it just changed the game. I'm not going into greater detail because I want to open up for questions. And as women professionals, mindful of our own ability to gender. And this is something that keeps coming up. One, how do we rear our sons? 2, before we speak up in the organization and go and ask, what are the thoughts going on in our head? For the women here, ask for help and support. Invest in professional networks. Dream and dream big. Sisterhood is important, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this. Be mindful of what you say about another woman. No two women's careers and lives are the same. The moment a woman comments negatively, and there's enough research globally to say this, that the moment a woman comments about another woman negatively, it gets magnified by the men. So just be mindful. And last but not the least, pay it forward. pay it forward, because there are, just like you, there are millions of women out there. And if you have benefited from any of the opportunity and access, make sure that you make it available. For male professionals, I don't have a separate deck, but enough to be able to say that, are you allies for the women? I'm sitting here today because of a fantastic network of men who felt that I could complement them in the work that they did, who could amplify the work that they did by virtue of the fact that I brought differentiated skills. It is to those men that a large part of the credit goes. Are you an ally? Are you supportive for the women who there work with you? Academic institutions, and I know that there are a few of you here, we need to do more advocacy, the gendered nature of our campus and how we perpetuate it. How can we bring more girls into being parts of clubs and committees that are historically male-dominated? What kind of non-negotiable can we talk on sexist jokes and comments that are made on campus? Strong internal committees that send out unambiguous signals, and strong research that can influence organizations and support policy. For each one of you in this room, thank you for being here. Be an ally. For each one of you, you are already a role model. We are embarking on social change. It's never happened in one generation. And in a gentle way, as Mahatma Gandhi said, you can shake the world. And thank you so much.
Awesome. Awesome, Vasanti. Thank you so much. We're going to open up for questions, but I have a question that's been in my head as you were talking, and loads of ideas buzzing. And the question is a little bit of something that I read, in fact, Vasanti, just half an hour before your talk. This is the Wall Street Journal has just released its new data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, US. And I'm using that on a wider context. And the data shows that 96.7% of preschool and kindergarten teachers are women. 2/3 of manicurists and pedicurists are Asian. And 92.4% of pilots and flight engineers are white. Is this just data, or is it a problem? And I want to hear your reflection. Is it a paradox? Is it a dilemma? Or we're just kind of, it's just data, so let it be?
No, this data, fortunately, across professions in India, look at the number of surgeons. Look at the number of pediatric thoracic surgeons. So the more you start narrowing the specialization, the fewer the women. Plain and simple. Okay?
Yes.
The greater the criticality. So, it just magnifies, because project managers, you will get customer support managers who are women. You will get marketing women. You will get legal women. You will get company secretary women. But will you get sales women? Will you get project managers women? Will you get program managers? And this is in most egalitarian industries, financial services, IT, where there are already so many women. Okay. So there are studies, Preetha, which actually say that how do these critical jobs, so we know that critical jobs impact our learnings. When you're put in those jobs, you acquire completely unique capabilities of seeing the world. There is research to say that critical roles don't come to women. So it's no longer representation that we are talking about, 20%, 25%. Are they represented in critical roles? Are they represented in P&L roles? And those numbers just start shrinking, which is why, if you look at it, when will we have enough executive directors who are women? Long, long way. So it is true. It is true. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, you can put it in the chat box. You can also ask your question. And I can see loads of people from across stakeholders. So Vasanthi, you were right. We have people from the development sector. We have people from academic. We have students. We also have academicians.
Yes, I like Dolly. I loved your comment there. I loved your comment there. Social change began long back. Emancipation of Indian women began with their participation in the freedom struggle. However, 75 years down the line, women are still grappling with the same problems. Women do not get the adequate support with caregiving roles. Completely agree with you. Completely agree with you on that. So the interesting, for me, the interesting thing when I reflect on this is the fact that women's participation in education is showing an upward sign. Yeah. I think that is a piece that we should not forget, because in any society in the world, when women get educated, family dynamics change. Their investment in health and educational decisions of the family improve. So, given the large gap that we had in terms of educational achievement, we are only now beginning to see shifts in middle class thinking, the middle class India. As the middle class gets stretched out in India, consumers are the only, marketeers are the ones who are watching out for that. But for me, sociologists, we are watching out to be able to see, as middle class gets stretched out and aspirations get more or less mimicked, and as education opportunities get better, and assuming that the gender diversity agenda, even to bring at lowest levels, continues, and investment in women entrepreneurship continues, I believe that the landscape will change very quickly. Yeah. And I think that is what the inflection point of the translation from education to economic empowerment, and not necessarily in terms of corporate jobs. The moment we make that shift, right, I think we'll be able to see more visible shifts. More visible shifts. But nice comment. Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Yeah.
Thank you. I have, there are loads of questions. I'm going to just ask, I'm just reading out the question, but Indira, if you can just tell who you are. Indira's question is, what do you think is something that will not change during our lifetime? Even when we know this, what can we do to bulldoze this at a societal level and organizational level? So that's Indira's questions. Indira, just a quick this thing in terms of your background, you present, corporate academics or the development sector. Okay, great.
I think
yeah. So Indira is a student from the Taramatra batch, and it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
So Vasanthi,
okay.
over to you, and then there are two other questions that I have.
Vincent, one more for you that I'm going to make uncomfortable and bold that you said. Okay. I had one slide that I didn't put up, which was because I didn't want to stir up more. One of the things that in the Pew report on India that was put up there is the need for a male child. And that unless a male child does the rights socially, both men and women, large, I think close to 82% or 84%, believe that male are the ones who have to perform the rites. So Indra, in a way, thank you for asking that question, because this really, really means that we have a long way in terms of deeply held beliefs to think about. Yeah, thanks. There, tokenism versus realism is the big debate. Do we need a critical mass, says Amanda. Absolutely. Sushmita, Alison Conrad, a dear colleague of mine who worked on looking at at Women on Board said that in Canada, and quite an influential public policy person, she basically said, as long as you are one, you are a woman. As long as you are two, you are a woman, two women professionals. And when you're three, you are professionals. So is 33% important? Yes, it is very important. And that is why that number is so crucial for us all to move towards. Yes. Women CEOs generally self-assess their performance as higher than men CEOs, especially in stakeholder relations. And I'm sorry, Aparna, I'm so unprepared for this question.
Is this true? Is this true?
I don't know. I always felt that a large number of times, glass cliff, that is,
yes.
Look at what's happening in American educational institutions. One after another, the diversity deans are all gone. Why? Because of the belief that during pandemic, they were very good because they were kind and compassionate. And now suddenly those same deans are no longer effective. Glass cliff I have seen for women. But this one is interesting, Aparna. Mail it to me.
It is interesting. Yes, Aparna,
Yes.
Mail it to me as well. Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. Yes, Indra. I have, yes. How do you specifically read the situation of women against the projected Indian cultural heritage? Oh, Vincent, I absolutely like your question. Let me just reflect on this a little bit and answer it with a little bit of a nuance that middle class, traditionally, in many societies, has been the upholder of morality. So, is the dominant Indian cultural heritage, are middle class women, will they find it more difficult to break through and navigate? Maybe. Economically vulnerable, there are no such inhibitions. The absolutely rich can break any belief, any value. So I think, Vincent, it might get tough for the middle class morality and upbringing and beliefs. It's always been difficult. I think this new narrative will be even more tougher there. Yes. Should we also aim for more women diversity? We shouldn't be having women from a certain economic class or geographical area in the work. Satinder, I want to just layer this question in multiple ways, right? So when we talk about, let's assume that on the shop floor, you have 40% diversity. Now that diversity will be very, very local. Okay. So now we are going to layer it by asking, do you have 40% diversity on the shop floor, but all your shop floor supervisors are men? And that's an interesting one, because if all your shop floor supervisors are men, your engineers are men, then how is it possible that you've hired 40% of women who have no potential whatsoever? Then in which case, your argument is basically business case. Okay? So it's interesting, which is why I said, no, the beauty of complexity thinking is the fact that don't go with these numbers. And I remember several years ago talking to a co-researcher, and we were writing a paper, and she said, oh my God, finally, when you look at the pyramid, that 40% at the base, 12%, 20%, 9%, 2%. Oh, it looks so similar. And then I remember we were saying, yes, it looks very similar in terms of the numbers, but the reasons for why women don't take STEM in the US and why with such high percentage of enrollment in STEM, we still have those numbers. The reasons for that are completely different. It's the same 3% at the top, but your 3% to our 3% in STEM is completely different. Yeah. So it's quite an interesting one for us to just think about. Yeah. Yes, Sushmita, these are just words. It's pure leaky pipeline. Couldn't agree more with you. A glass ceiling, to be honest, I think there is not much of glass ceiling today compared to maybe 10 years ago, because if there's one thing which has changed reasonably, including traditional sectors, is the recognition that there are competent women. I think that has changed. Okay. But what has not changed as well is the middle level. The numbers, look, the pyramid starts hitting. No, it's not just women. The pyramid starts hitting, which means at 1,000 you needed at the base, you only need 100. And at the next level, you only need 10. And in that 10, if you're not mindful, and if your pool is 90 men and 10 women, and if you're not mindful, you're going to replicate it with 9:1 at the next level, which I think is where the challenge is. And I do believe that good companies today are beginning to do identification of high potential women earlier and earlier. And I think that will solve the problem. Identify them earlier, give them opportunities, place them under a mentor who can kind of guide them when they have to go slow, take a break, work from home. I think some organizations are doing it very, very. I think that's the way forward.
I have another question, Vasanthi, and this is like both Sushmita's and Satyender's question. Reservation, and a little more of hard affirmative action or diversity initiatives, etc., is also backfiring. I mean, there is a whole lot of, both anecdotal as well as research to say that it's like, oh my God, this is like taking it for granted. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah. Preeta, whenever you take away privileges from a group, okay, there will be consequences. And it's interesting that what will happen as you earmark 23% and 32% is that whether we like it or not, there are people who are going to lose. And those will be men. Which is why when I highlighted that meritocracy, the assumption is men, wherever there are men, it is meritocratic. And which is why we use the word diversity hiring. Yeah? So I think once you have enjoyed privileges and now you have to compete for those privileges, there will be backlash. Society is patriarchal. So if you invest more time at work, there's backlash at home. Okay. So for some period of time, it's inevitable, which is why I'm more and more asking organizations, academics, for all of us to think about this as an ethical problem. As an ethical problem. Is it okay for us to have our children and grandchildren not unrepresented? I mean, would we like that kind of a society? So some of those are tougher conversations, but I think we need to have much more, much more discussions, more candidly on these areas. But yes, there will be people who will lose. There will be backlash.
Awesome. No, but I can already see 2-3 conversations, Vasanthi, that we will come back to you and ask you to do on the supply chain for sure, as because that's like a lot of work that needs to be done on all of this. We're seriously running out of time, so I'm going to request Anu George. She heads research at CGEIL to kind of wrap this up and close this. Anu, over to you.
Thank you, Preeta. At the end of this very powerful and enriching session, on behalf of all of us, I would like to thank Dr. Vasanthi for today's session. Your expertise and insights added very immense value to this discussion, and we are truly grateful for the knowledge you shared. We appreciate your willingness and your time and expertise to share your thoughts with us. And the depth of your understanding on gender diversity and related issues was very evident, and it has enriched our understanding on this subject. You have called our attention to the intersecting factors important to understanding gender diversity, which is usually missed out in all our discussions related to gender. So moving forward, we will definitely apply these insights and understanding we gained today in our areas of work or research. And so thank you so much once again for your invaluable contribution. And as you said, social change has never happened in one generation's time. So let us hope for a better tomorrow and a better future. And also, I would like to thank all the participants from various institutions and those who have asked questions and taken forward this discussion and enriched the discussion. Thank you to everyone.
Before you leave, may I ask everybody to switch on your camera so we take a photograph of the diverse groups that we have right now. So for a second, Shayan, you are our best photographer. If you can take photographs, please. Yes, for a second, if you can just switch on your cameras. Dolly, you are switched off. Switch on your video, Dolly.
Indira, we are missing you in the camera.
Yes, Indira's missing. Dolly, switch on. Shraddha. Nicholas. Rajiv, Akriti. Thank you, Devika. Good to see you, Indira. Aparna, you have to send us that research, whether you switch on your video or not.
Great.
Thank you, Bandana.
Are we done, Shayan? Or...
Yes, are we done, Shayan, or we have to pause?
Yeah,
we have to pause longer.
No, we are done.
Okay, thank you so much.
Very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thanks so
everyone.
much.
Watch out for our next Pathmaker dialogues, and Vasanti will get you back again for at least 2 more calls. Thank you.
Ouch. Okay, did I commit that? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, Vasanti.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you, Father.
To the wonderful session.